After watching the special editions in 1997, I immediately went to a bookstore and purchased my first two Star Wars books, The Truce at Bakura by Kathy Tyers and The Krytos Trap by Michael A. Stackpole. Truce at Bakura is an understandable purchase because the cover of the paperback edition loudly proclaims that as Return of the Jedi ends, an exciting new saga begins. But why did I pick The Krytos Trap? The book says on the cover, Book 3 in the exciting series. I guess I just really liked the look of the spaceships. More so than Rogue Squadron or Race Squadron or any of the other X-Wing books, The Krytos Trap is the one that I remember the most, probably because it's the one that I read first. The Krytos Trap made it to number 15 on the New York Times paperback bestseller list for 2 straight weeks, from the week of September 29th to the week of October 6th, 1996. Of the 3 X-Wing books that I've read so far, this was the most familiar to me. Tycho's trial and Corran's imprisonment felt very familiar. What was a little more hazy was what the rest of the rogues were doing, though. So, a brief summary. The New Republic drastically needs a cure for the deadly Krytos virus, so Rogue Squadron is dispatched to steal some Bacta back from Warlord Zinj. But all the focus is on the trial of Tycho Chelchu for treason and murder. Except unbeknownst to everyone but the reader, Corran Horn is still alive, imprisoned in Isard's horrible prison Luzankia. So I feel like I've really come full circle on Corran Horn in these books. Rereading Rogue Squadron, he was just the most obnoxious character, and I was not looking forward to having to put up with him for 3/4 more books. But in The Krytos Trap, his plotline was my favorite plotline. It started off a little shaky with him trying to be brainwashed, flying the simulators, but once Sard interrogates him and then throws him in the prison, it was great. I loved how from the very beginning he's like, I'm gonna escape. And Jan and the other prisoners were like, no one's escaped. And he's like, I'm a rogue. We do the impossible. And I also liked how he was able to figure out the twists that Isard had put on the prison, basically that they were upside down. So if you would try to escape heading up, what you thought was up, you'd actually only be heading further and further down into the prison. I really liked the scene when he tested his hypothesis. They start a prison fight, he throws a rock up, and it sticks because of the gravity generators. Daracote is watching, not so keen on Daracote being in prison, just because if Isard were to throw everyone in prison who failed her in some way, I feel like Luzankia would be entirely populated with her minions, but we'll ignore that. And Corran's escape was very thrilling, perhaps a little too coincidental that it let him out in the former Jedi Museum, but very exciting stuff. I also like the callback we got to Thrawn Trilogy with him finding a little holdout blaster in the tapes for Corvus Minor, which is how Mara Jade was able to get a blaster in The Last Command. I also liked Wedge. I mean, it just goes without saying that I'm gonna like Wedge and like what he's going through. I felt like him showing an interest in Ayala sort of came out of nowhere, but I really liked what happened with it. He's basically interested in this lady, but her husband has shown back up. He wasn't dead. And Wedge is a gentleman about it. He's friendly with Ayala and he's friendly with Derek. So I love Wedge. He's just such a good guy. I also like that he was so adamantly trying to get Tycho's trial postponed or just completely done away with. And I liked how conflicted he was about his testimony and how he was there to show beyond a shadow of doubt Tycho can't be a spy, but his words almost worked against him there. Tycho's trial, though, I felt was a little bit of a weak point here. I would expect a military trial in space setting to be a little bit different than just ye old generic American trial. I know that instead of a judge, there were 3, but otherwise it was pretty much exactly the same as something you'd see on Law and Order. Noir is the defense attorney and the prosecuting attorney, and they're always yelling objections. It was a little bit like an Ace Attorney game. I also felt like there was just so much evidence against Tycho that Stackpole almost wrote himself into a hole. Obviously, Tycho's not the spy. Someone else is the spy. He didn't kill Corran Horn because Corran Horn's still alive. But instead of proving that this wasn't the case through facts and testimonies, it's proven in ye old person shows up, says, he can't have killed me because here I am, I'm alive. Really? And then after that, to say that, oh, well, Kraken always knew that it wasn't Tycho and he was just trying to get the real spy, didn't really work for me either, because if that were the case, why did they put so much effort into all this evidence stacked up against Tycho if they knew that he wasn't the spy? For it to be such a life and death matter, like they have to try Tycho now because they have to show the galaxy that justice will be done, and so Tycho, it's looking very likely like he might face a firing squad or something like that, only for them to immediately turn around and just drop everything like it never happened. Poor Tycho. I do have to say though that after really liking Tycho in books 1 and 2, I felt like he didn't get a lot of development in this one. He's just long suffering. Everyone's like, Tycho, we know it's not you, and Tycho's like, oh, well, I have to trust the New Republic's doing what's right. I don't know, Tycho, come on, be a little more angry about this. And we got more development with Gavin and interspecies relationships. He's now dating the Bothan, Asir, who's part of Rogue Squadron. I question, though, Gavin's maturity level given his age. He's just barely 17 now. I don't know how old Asir is, but she's older than him. And number one, I'm just still surprised that the New Republic Navy took a 16-year-old. And number two, just that he's had to go through all this stuff. He's obviously grown up a lot, but there's the part of me that wonders, should a 17-year-old be having to go through this? Mirax is grieving Corran, but then presumably dies like halfway through the book when Zinj's forces ambush all the ships that were carrying back to Coruscant. This is a bit where me knowing more about the books and not reading them as they're published sort of came back to bite me, because I instantly knew that Mirax wasn't dead because she marries Corran. But I think if I was reading this as it came out, Wedge's lack of emotion would have really confused me and also tipped me off to the fact that, yeah, she's probably not dead. Gavin comes and sees him and says, like, you know, you can grieve, and Wedge is like, yeah, I work things out on my own. And it's just weird. Mirax is pretty much like a sister to him. They've known each other from childhood, and he just doesn't really have a response to her apparent death. And then in the end, after the trial, after the spy goes back to Isard, Mirax just shows up and we sort of get an info dump of everything that happened with her, that she didn't stop at Alderaan like all the other ships. She was going somewhere else. She was setting up the thing in place to make the special Bacta that will treat the Krytos virus. And it just was too much, too late. I sort of felt like, oh, okay, yeah, that's where she's been. Maybe it would have been nice to get a hint of that before now. Curtin lore also has a lot of interesting things going on with him in this one. At the end of Wedge's gamble, Isard made him the head of the Palpatine Counterinsurgency Front, which is basically to fight the rebels with some of their own medicine, but even worse because they're Imperials, so they do things like blow up Bacta supplies and blow up schools. They just really like blowing things up. And Lore is really trying to set himself up as almost his own power. And he ends up under the sway, I guess, of the former Moff Voru, who is now in charge of some local militia. Lore didn't really like taking orders from Isard, and he really doesn't like taking orders from Voru. So in the end, he decides he's going to defect to rebellion, and he dies. And amusingly enough, he dies because Isard thinks that Dericote is informing against her and sends one of her brainwashed associates to kill Dericote, but it's Lore. So Lore wasn't even meant to die. He was shot, confused for someone else. I sort of wish there had been a little bit of resolution with Lore and Corran though, because Lore dies, Corran's just completely somewhere else. Everything that Lore did was because he hated Corran Horn, so I just wanted that to tie back in somehow. And Isard is once again a shadowy presence here. We just see her briefly. Hopefully we'll see more of her in book 4, The Back to War, but right now she's just a head Bond villain. So not even the Bond villain of the movie, but like the guy that's sending all the sub-villains out to do things. And you can't really get a good sense of her from the little bit you see. Dericote is in prison. He makes an escape when Corran makes an escape. Corran kills him. This leads to several false assumptions. Basically that Dericote is the one that has escaped. Dericote is the one that's going to testify at the trial. And when Corran makes his way finally out of Luzankia to the Jedi Museum, when Imperials show up, they're not looking for him, they're looking for Dericote. So it was good to see you, Dericote. You made a horrible virus, then Corran threw you in a garbage compactor. So for the most part, I like the plotline of the rogues, the missions they were going on, the dogfights, things like that. But there were a few occasions where I felt like either I was missing information or that bits were cut out. The first one was when they went to Ryloth to get the Ryle. There was just a lot of world building information about Ryloth that I'm wondering if it's from the Rogue Squadron comic, just because there was a lot of detail about the warriors and what they wear and the sort of arrangement of their culture. And I was expecting more to happen with that, but instead it was literally they got there, they had a party, Wedge talked to some warrior and he was like, I will give you all the Ryle. and then they just came back. A similar one was when they find the remains of all the ships in the Alderaan graveyard. Wedge tells Gavin to take some of the rogues, go to Tatooine, commission a freighter, pick up, I guess, the remains, and then take them back to Coruscant. And then immediately the next chapter was Gavin saying, Wedge, it's okay for you to mourn. And I was like, is there something missing from my book here? So then I actually borrowed from the library the ebook just so that I could check. And no, there wasn't something missing. I thought that there were scenes with Gavin on Tatooine, but I must have been confusing that with another book. I also felt like the whole Krytos virus subplot was resolved a bit too off-screen for me. It's this huge threat, this deadly virus. It kills people, it's easily spread, it's in the water supply, it's gonna raise all these human, non-human tensions. Then we find out that number one, the thunderstorm that the rogues started at the end of Wedge's Gamble when they were trying to get the shields down burned a bunch of the virus off of the water supply, and that the virus actually transmits or moves too quickly so that it's like not as contagious as it could be. And then they just off screen, we don't even know about it, have made all this Bacta that will work exactly for that. So it felt like instead of actively working to stop this, the New Republic just sort of stumbled upon the solution. I was expecting the New Republic to be more actively involved in stopping this virus. I do have to say though that I really liked the scene where Gavin found the Gamorrean who was sick, who knew he was sick, and basically sacrificed himself so that no one else would get sick. It was horrifying, but that was really the only first-hand experience with the virus that we got in the book. I also am not keen on how the spy plotline was resolved. Basically, Corran's looking at all this information in the library, Luzankia, and he pulls up his record, and then he pulls up Tycho's record and sees that Tycho was, like Jan said, catatonic. He was a sleeper. He's not brainwashed. And then he just like looks up some other things, like, oh, I know who the spy is. And I guess I was expecting more with Arisi in this book because we had seen a fair bit with her in book 1 and book 2, but then she's like off screen grieving Corran. And then in the very end when they're, fighting the ties as Luzankia's coming up and she's like, oh no, I've been hit, oh, a tractor beam got me, and Wedge is like, huh, well, I was monitoring everyone's astromix. I mean, it just seems like such a stupid way to go back to your boss. Why fake something like that? I would have thought that she would have assumed that, yeah, probably they're monitoring your droids, and if you say something that the droid can't back up, it's gonna look pretty dang suspicious. I guess I'm wondering too, like, why extract her in that way? Why not fake her death and then extract her? And while I thought the scene at the end with Luzankia was amazing, first of all, Stackpole is very careful to give no hint that Luzankia is a ship. Normally in the books, ships' names are italicized. Luzankia is never italicized. Just the mines that the prisoners are in, uselessly making gravel, it was all great. And when Luzankia like lifts up and is like getting out of Coruscant, that would be something that would be really cool in a TV show. Like if Rebels or a live action show wanted to do something like that, I'd be all over it. But then I start to think about it further and I'm like, did the Emperor really build a superstar destroyer on Coruscant, then build buildings over it? What's the point of that? Other than to have a really cool scene where it like rises up and it's getting away. I guess too, in a way, I'm now questioning Sard's game plan of like abducting people and brainwashing them and then sending them out. I'm not sure what that accomplishes that just like sending out death commandos or something couldn't. I really liked Derek, but having him be one of her brainwashed minions just made me sad. So the Krytos Trap ends with Erizi and Asard and Moff Voru all gone to Thyfera. They've taken it over, but the New Republic doesn't want to get involved. So the rogues all resign their commissions and they're going to be mercenaries now in Book 4, taken down Isard. And Corran found out that he is the grandson of a Corellian Jedi. Luke offered to train him, but he was like, nope, I got better things to do right now. So on the whole, I felt like the Krytos Trap, again, like all of the X-Wing books so far, really exciting, thrilling action scenes. Corran Horn's prison escape was very exciting. But the more I start to think about things, the more I can just pick them apart. And in this one, I feel like Tycho's trial in particular is the weak point. That there's just so many things that I question there that I could just start to question things branching off from it. But on the whole, it's still great. And the dogfights especially, I think, are well written and a lot of fun to read. So next time, it is a standalone. Hurrah! I will be reading The New Rebellion by Christine Catherine Roosh.